This morning, of course, we've just 15 minutes ago heard the siren for Yom HaShoah. So, of course, I want to dedicate this shiur to the memory of the victims of the most horrific disaster that mankind has ever suffered, certainly ever suffered at the hands of other people, other human beings, if you can call them that. This morning in shul, we said Kel Mele Rachamim, even though it's Nisan, and you're not supposed to say Kel Mele Rachamim in Nisan. The Holocaust was an event which supersedes everything else and pushes aside various other considerations because it was an epoch-breaking and making event. So if you think about what we are doing now, here we are, most of us, if not all of us, no, not all of us, but most of us, born after the Holocaust, sitting, most of us, in a land of Israel which didn't exist, part of a strong and at least partially united people. Let's look at it with the glass half full today. And here we are, survived, and not only survived, but thrived and thriving. And where are our enemies today? Their memories are infamous, they're hated, they're reviled, and quite rightly so, and we have survived. Hinei lo yanum v'lo yishan Shomer Yisrael. The Shomer Yisrael, the guardian of Israel, neither sleeps nor slumbers. There are questions, there are always questions, there are no answers, there are only reactions. I sent out on one of the groups today a link to a shiur that I gave last year about the various different theological reactions to the Holocaust. And those of you who have got an hour and a half to spare, who are interested, feel free to have a look at that. There's some interesting information in there. That was sent out on the group. Anybody that hasn't got that link who wants it can get it from me or from Avril. So this shiur of Gemarah, which goes back to 1500 years ago, discussing matters from a previous 1500 years, so 3000 years ago, is testament to the fact that we are here, we are an eternal people, and despite the horrendous events of the mid-20th century, we survived, we're here, and the memory of those who didn't make it, those who were killed in the Holocaust, we salute them, we commemorate them, and we hope for an aliyah for their neshamot by our learning Gemarah Sanhedrin today. So I dedicate this shiur to the victims of the Holocaust. So just tell you one little story, which I always think about today. I posted also on one of the groups, I posted a painting that my daughter Rena did, which is very poignant. And I wrote a little caption which says, a picture speaks louder than 6 million words. And I think that's true. Somebody once said to Rebbitzin Ruthie Portnoy, who was the Rebbitzin of Hale Shul in South Manchester, somebody once said to her after she'd had her 9th child, when are you going to stop having children? And she said, well, I've had 6 million. So I think that speaks for itself. We need to be remembering, but we also need to be moving forward with those memories firmly in our mind. and we dedicate this shiur to the victims of the Holocaust. Let's go on to some learning of Sanhedrin. We are on Daf Yud Bet. I think we're right at the bottom. We might have actually gone over onto Yud Bet Amud Bet. Can't remember now. I think we did. Yes, we're on Yud Bet Amud Bet. It's page 63 in the Steinsaltz Gemarah. I'm going to get it up on the screen for you just right now. If you give me a second. There we go. So you ought to be able to see that in a second or two. There you are. Okay, so we are, I need to do a little bit of a recap here because it's a couple of weeks since we've learned together our Gemarah. So we were still in the subject of intercalating months. When the court is allowed to add in an extra month of the year, and when it's not allowed to do so, what are the reasons that they do so? What's an acceptable reason? What's not an acceptable reason? And of course, we know the background is that the main reason that this was done was to make sure that Pesach remained in the spring. All the other reasons were a bit peripheral to that. That's the main reason. And it's always the month of Adar, which is intercalated, meaning it's the extra month is Adar. We have two Adars, like we did this year, when we have an intercalated year. And it was that we where we left it last time. We started to speak, let me just go back a little bit. We started to speak about the idea of Tum'ah and Tahara. Impurity, ritual impurity, and purity. We spoke about the idea of the para aduma, the red heifer, how the impurity is changed to purity by the ritual of the red heifer. And we also mentioned, and we're going to carry on in this vein now, we mentioned the idea that it's known, of course, that you cannot bring a korban, a sacrifice, when you to the Bet Mikdash, when you are in a state of ritual impurity, when you are tamei. You have to go through the purification process before you can bring a korban. And the question arises, and arose, as to what happens to the public sacrifices. The public sacrifices, the daily sacrifice that is done in the morning and the afternoon, every day. The Musaf sacrifice, which is done on Shabbat, on Rosh Chodesh, and on Chag. And the Korban Pesach, which although is a private sacrifice, as in one way because it's a family thing. It's not a public. It's not done on behalf of the public. It's public in as much as everybody does it at the same time. Normally, when you do your private sacrifices, not everybody does it at the same time. I don't do my sins at the same time as Avril does her sins. So I will bring my sin offerings at a different time to hers. I will bring my Thanksgiving offering when I have something good happen to me. It will be a different time when somebody else does. But the Korban Pesach is a sort of public offering because everybody does it at the same time. Everybody does it in the afternoon of the 14th of Nisan. And so the question arose, what happens if the whole of the people are tamei, or let's say most of the people, more than 50% of the people are tamei? What happens to the public offerings? What happens to the Korban Pesach? Now, how could that happen? Well, I showed you a photograph last time and the time before of the funeral of Rav Kanievsky, which took place a few weeks ago. And there were, by all accounts, around 500,000 people there. All those people would have been tamei meit. and that's in fact what the Gemarah brings. The Gemarah brings the scenario where the Nasi, the president, the Nasi of the people, the Nasi of the Sanhedrin, passes away, and everybody goes to the funeral because that's what you have to do. You are obliged to go to the funeral of the Nasi, and then you get Tameh. So the Gemarah brings the scenario that everybody is Tameh. What do we do? Well, we know, don't we, from Parashat Behalotecha, that there is a solution for Pesach to when you are Tameh. What am I referring to? Anybody? Leon, tell us, what am I referring to, since it's your bar mitzvah? You're muted, Leon.
It's in Parashat Behalotecha, which, as you say, is my bar mitzvah, when Hashem said to Moses, if any man will become contaminated through a human corpse or on a distant road, whether you or your generations, he shall make the Pesach offering for Hashem. In the second month, on the 14th day, in the afternoon, shall he make it. With matzahs and bitter herbs shall he eat it. So if a man is Tameh, he observes a Pesach Sheni.
Correct. Pesach Sheni. He gets a second chance. Correct. It's on the screen for you now. It's in Bamidbar, Behalotecha. It's chapter 9 of Bamidbar. This was one of the cases where people came to Moshe and he didn't know what to do. And he said, hang on, I'll ask Hashem. And Hashem said, good point. Let's give you a second chance. So those who were ritually unclean, Tameh, or they were not able to get to the Bet Mikdash, they got a second chance on Pesach Sheni, which was a month later on the 14th of Adar. So for Korban Pesach, we had an option. There was an option already in place. We went to discuss a situation that Chizkiyahu HaMelech, we spoke about Chizkiyahu HaMelech last time. Chizkiyahu HaMelech was the sandwich between two rotten kings. He was a tzaddik, he was a Baal Tshuva, and he was the first, he was the Eish HaTorah of his time. He was the leader of the Baal Tshuva movement. He brought people back to the service of Hashem, having been steeped in Avodah Zarah, in idol worship at the hands of his father. And he saw that it came to Pesach that everybody was Tameh because they'd been involved with Avodah Zarah, which makes you Tameh. So what did he do? Let's go back to our Gemarah. Let's go back to our Gemarah now. Here we go. There we go. So what did he do? He did actually give out an order that the year should be intercalated so that we would have an extra month, and the 14th of the next month, which would normally be Pesach Sheni, actually turned out to be Pesach Rishon, because he put in another month. Now, in absolute terms, it made no difference to the day at which they did it. It's just what the day was called, because they did the Korban Pesach a month later. But by intercalating the year, that month later was not the 14th of Adar, it was the 14th of Nisan, because we'd intercalated a month. Are you with me? Now, when he did that, he then, the pasuk tells us that he then sought, he requested forgiveness on himself. Over here, it's on the page here. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Ma'aseh b'Chizkiyahu HaMelech. There was a story that happened with Chizkiyahu HaMelech, Melech Yehuda, the king of Judah. She'iber et hashana mipnei hatumah. He intercalated the year because everybody was tamei. Ubikesh rachamim al atzmo, and he sought compassion for himself. Dichtiv, as it quotes the pasuk there, Ki marbita am rabat me'efram u'menashe yisachar zebulun lo hiteharu. For a multitude of the people, even many from Ephraim and Manasseh, Yisachar and Zebulun had not cleansed themselves. And so, Ki achru et ha-pesach, below kakatuv ki itpalel Chizkiyahu aleim lemo Hashem atov yichaper ba'ad. Chizkiyahu had prayed for them, may Hashem pardon everyone who seeks his heart to seek God, though he need not be cleansed according to the purification that pertains to sacred items. So what had happened was Chizkiyahu intercalated the year and then, as it were, apologized for doing so. So, as a result of that, because of that, Rabbi Yehuda answers the question about whether the public being tamei is a reasonable excuse for an intercalation or not. This is the question that the Gemarah was addressing. Is it allowed to intercalate the month because everybody is tamei? Tanu Rabbanan over here, the Brighter says, no, ein ma'abrin et hashana mipnei hatumah. You're not allowed to do so. Rabbi Yehuda disagreed, and he said, yes, you are. Ma'abrin, we are allowed to. And he quotes our story from Chizkiyahu, who did. So if Chizkiyahu did it, must have been okay. And that's where we got to last time. Now, let's go on. Rabbi Shimon Omer. Rabbi Shimon says, Im mipnei hatuma ibruha mu'beret. Rabbi Shimon says, you know what? Really, he shouldn't have done it. It's not allowed to intercalate because of tumah. That's not a good reason. But if he did it, it counts. So, in other words, if the Nasi announces an extra month because of impurity, even though that was not something he should have done, according to Rabbi Shimon, then it counts. We do have the extra month, and of course, it's very important to know whether it counts or not, because everything depends on it. Everything depends on, the whole of all the chagim will be out of sync if we don't allow it, or we do allow it. If some people keep it, some people don't. We'll be ending up in the situation we're in now with the with Chutz La'aretz, with the laning. Chutz La'aretz are a week behind us in the Parsha. We will lane here in Israel. We will lane Parshat Kedoshim this Shabbat, whereas they are laning Parshat Acharei Mot in Chutz La'aretz. Why? Because last Shabbat, when we did Acharei Mot, it was Chag for them, and they had laning for the 8th day of Pesach. Another reason why we ought to do away with the idea of second day of Yom Tov, but that's another story. So Rabbi Shimon says that you are not allowed to intercalate because of Tumah, but if you do, it stands. So he asks the question, so why did Chizkiyahu ask for forgiveness? If he was allowed to do it, or if it was not so bad that it didn't sort of fail, why did he have to apologize for it? Answers Rabbi Shimon. This is Rabbi Shimon's view. She'ein ma'abrin ela Adar, v'hu iber Nisan be-Nisan. You're only allowed to intercalate which month? Well, which month?
Adar.
Adar. You're only allowed to intercalate Adar. And what he did was he intercalated Nisan. So, in other words, he made the intercalation before Rosh Chodesh Nisan, after Rosh Chodesh Nisan. If he'd intercalated it on the 29th of Adar, even though we've already had Purim, we spoke about this a couple of months ago, normally you would want to intercalate before Purim so that you don't end up having two Purims. but you're allowed to intercalate right up to the end of Adar. So if he'd have done it on the 29th of Adar, no problem, says Rabbi Shimon. But what did he do? He did it on the 1st or the 2nd of Nisan, and therefore the extra month that he gave was not Adar, it was Nisan. So they had not an Adar Sheni or an Adar bet, they had a Nisan bet. What's wrong with that? Why is that such a big deal? Why should he have to ask Rachamim for doing that? What's so bad about having a Nisan bet? Anyone?
You're not going to have Pesach in the spring.
Yeah, you still have Pesach in the spring. Makes no difference whether you call it Nisan bet or Adar bet. You've intercalated a month. Why is it such a bad thing to intercalate on the 1st of Nisan instead of the 29th of Adar? Why is that so terrible? Cast your minds back about 3 weeks. What did we read about 3 weeks ago on Shabbat? David Marks is about to tell us. Nachon, Parshat HaChodesh is a mitzvah in the Torah. HaChodesh hazeh Rosh Chodashim. HaChodesh hazeh lachem Rosh Chodashim. This month, Nisan, has got to be for you Rosh Chodashim. What does that mean? The first month, the head of the months. So Nisan has to be the first month. So if you have a Nisan bet is not the first month, is it? It's the second month, because you've got Nisan Aleph, which is the first month. When are you going to have Pesach? In Nisan Bet. So you are having Pesach, the original main Pesach Rishon, not Pesach Sheni. You're having Pesach Rishon in what is effectively the second month. You've got a Nisan Bet. You can't have a Nisan Bet. That is transgressing a mitzvah d'oraita, a Torah law. The Torah says, HaChodesh hazeh lachem Rosh Chodashim. So says Reb Shimon on the screen for you here, where my pointer is. The reason that he had to apologize or seek forgiveness from Hashem is not because he made the intercalation, but because he made the intercalation Nisan ben-Nisan. He made the intercalation during Nisan, which gave us a Nisan bet, and that was a transgression against a Torah law. Now, you'll say, well, okay, so what? Big deal, Torah law. But that was a very important Torah law. They're all important. That was the very first mitzvah given to the Jewish people. Very, very important. Why? Because it sets the scene for the entire year. And Chizkiyahu, who was a big Baal Tshuva, as is often the case with Baalei Tshuva, they don't know all the halachas straight away. And he didn't know this one. And he made a mistake. And therefore, he had to seek forgiveness from Hashem. That's Rabbi Shimon's view. Okay? Now, this is where the names get a bit confusing. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, a different Rabbi Shimon, this is Rabbi Shimon, the son of Yehuda, Omer, Mishum Rabbi Shimon, in the name of the first Rabbi Shimon, Mipnei shehisi et Israel lasot Pesach Sheni. Because he says, no, the reason that he had to seek forgiveness from Hashem was nothing to do with intercalating the year. In fact, it was because he didn't intercalate the year. What did he do? He told everybody to do what it said in the parasha we just read of Baalotcha, do Pesach in Iyar. And that was not right, because there is a halacha that says that if everybody is tamei, you do the korban in a state of tumah. In a state of tumah. In other words, whilst there is a halacha that says you do not bring a korban when you are in a state of tumah. If more than 50% of the people are in a state of tumah, that impurity is put aside or is dismissed. And I say that advisedly, because the next piece of Gemarah is going to be a discussion about whether the impurity is just pushed to the side or whether it is dismissed completely. It's a very important concept which takes up a lot of machloket between the Tanaim and the Amoraim and the Poskim. Everybody agrees that the fact is that there were times in history when people, the majority of the people, were impure, were tamei, and they were not able to get purified, either because there was no para aduma ashes, or because there was no time, or something happened like the Nasi died, or something like that. And we know that the Tum'ah is, as it were, overlooked. Now, the question is it overlooked and then brought back afterwards? In other words, it's just pushed to the side for a minute whilst we do the Korban, or is it over and done with? And the two expressions are Tum'ah dechuya. The Tum'ah is pushed aside, from the same word as nidche. When you have Tisha B'Av, which falls on a Shabbat, when do we fast? We don't fast on Shabbat. We fast on the following day, on the Sunday, and that is called Tisha B'Av nidche, which is pushed aside. It's pushed on. It's postponed. So, is Tum'ah dechuya b'tzibur? In other words, is the impurity of the congregation, of the majority of the people, just pushed aside temporarily, or is it hutra, Tum'ah hutra b'tzibur? Now, the word hutra comes from the same word as mutar or heter. It's the same word, permitted. So Tum'ah hutra b'tzibur means that the Tum'ah is completely got rid of. It's as if it's not there. A much stronger event, if you like, than dechuya, just pushing it aside. This is the machloket that the Gemarah is getting involved in now. It's not the only place in the whole of Shas where this machloket is discussed, but this is one of the places. So the question is, the populace is tamei. Is that tum'ah? Is that impurity just postponed, pushed aside, or is it hutra? Is it completely forgiven? It's gone. It's out of the way. And so that's the question. So what we now say is Amar, one of the masters, one of the Tanaim, says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is Ma'abrin. Rabbi Yehuda, we just said this over here, we're going back to our Rabbi Yehuda over here. Remember, he said, Ma'abrin, we do allow intercalation because of Tum'ah. Alma, we see it lay Rabbi Yehuda. Therefore, it would appear that according to Rabbi Yehuda, Tum'ah dechuya hi b'tzibur. Rabbi Yehuda holds that we can push off, that the Tum'ah is merely pushed off. It's overridden, it's not really allowed to do it, and it's an excuse. If everybody is tamei, well, we push aside the Tum'ah just because we've no choice. But if we have another option, what would the option be? The option would be to intercalate the year. Why is that a better option, according to Rabbi Yehuda? Because we don't need to push aside the Tum'ah, because we've now got a whole nother month in order for the people to get pure again. Okay? the reason that they were impure is they never had time to get pure again before Pesach. So, two choices. Let's say either we can bring it in a state of tumah, because we know that that's allowed, or we can intercalate a year. The fact that Rabbi Yehuda says we intercalate a year indicates that he prefers that the korban is not brought in the state of tumah, but we postpone it for a month by using the intercalation, so that the people have got time to become pure again, and the korban will be brought in a state of purity. Says this particular opinion, this shows that Rabbi Yehuda holds that the tumah is not got rid of completely, because if it was, there'd be no reason to intercalate. Because once the tumah is hutra, it's got rid of completely. It's as if it's not there. Why would I need to intercalate because of tumah? I don't. It's gone. The tumah's finished. The fact that he says, I want to intercalate rather than doing the korban in a state of impurity, shows that in his mind, in Rabbi Yehuda's mind, this tumah, this impurity is not got rid of completely. It's only pushed to the side. And if there's a better option, I want to go for the better option. Says Rabbi Yehuda, the better option is that we intercalate. That's what the Gemarah says at the beginning. Okay, you're gonna see, we're gonna do a volte-face here. We're gonna turn on it on our head in a minute. But right at the moment, Rabbi Yehuda holds, according to this opinion, that we do intercalate, and that's a proof that the impurity is only pushed aside and not got rid of completely. Right. Now, the Gemarah asks a question against that. The Gemarah says, hey, hang on a minute. What about this idea? Says the Gemarah. Vahatanya, have we not learnt in a Braita, tzitz ben sheyeshno al mitzcho uven she'enu al mitzcho meratzeh. The tzitz, this picture over here on the right hand side, is the tzitz. Anybody know what that tzitz is? Well, it's not tzitzit, it is the tzitz. What is the tzitz? Anybody? What does it look like?
Is it what was worn on the forehead?
Yes, correct, Sharon. The forehead of whom?
Of the high priest.
Of the high priest, correct. Is the what do we call it? It is the head plate. The head plate of the Kohen Gadol. And we read about that in Parshat, in Sefer Shemot. So I'm going to show it to you now. Let me get it on the screen for you. Sefer Shemot. It's in the Parsha of Tetzaveh, chapter 28. Leon is going to read. I think it's down the bottom. It's about chapter 28, verse 36.
You shall make a head plate of pure gold, and you shall engrave upon it, engraved like a signet ring, holy to Hashem. You shall place it on a cord of turquoise wool, and it shall be on the turban. Opposite the front of the turban shall it be. It shall be on Aaron's forehead, so that Aaron shall bring forgiveness for a sin regarding the sacred offerings that the children of Israel consecrate for any gifts of their sacred offerings. And it shall be on his forehead always, to bring them favor before Hashem.
Okay, let's stop there. So the Torah tells us in Tetzaveh to make this golden head plate. And what we're going to be discussing now is basically this pasuk here, verse 38. V'haya, and it shall be, meaning the head plate, al metzach Aharon, on the forehead of Aharon. Fine. What's it there for? The pasuk tells us. V'nasa Aharon et avon hakodoshim, and Aharon shall bear the sin. In other words, this sounds a little Christian, but he's bearing the sin of the people. Let me just get rid of that phone. Oh, you might know Philip's phoning me in the middle of everything. Bim. There we go. Aaron, when he's wearing this tzitz, is bearing the sin. He is, as it were, shouldering the iniquity, the sin of Yisrael, of Bnei Yisrael. What particular sins are we talking about? Well, the verse tells us, "V'nasa Aaron et avon hakodoshim," things to do with Kodesh. What's Kodesh? Holiness. Things to do with holiness, purity. Asher yakdishu b'nei Yisrael l'chol matnot kodshehem, for the sanctity of the holy gift that the Bnei Israel are bringing, which means that is the korbanot, the sacrifices. What possible sin can there be that Aharon is bearing on behalf of the Bnei Israel when they bring their sacrifices? What could it be? Well, it must be that these sacrifices were brought in an incorrect manner, one of which is when they were brought in a state of impurity. So this pasuk is interpreted by the Gemarah to mean that the tzitz, that picture, I'm going to go back to the Gemarah in a minute, but I just want to leave the chumash on the page for the moment. You'll see why in a sec. The tzitz, when it's being worn by Aharon, is doing a job. It's almost like, it's a magic potion thing that forgives the Bnei Israel for bringing a korban, a sacrifice, in a manner that it shouldn't have been brought. If it was done wrong, maybe the animal wasn't right, maybe there was a blemish on the animal that they didn't know about. Whatever it is that made the sacrifice not right, including being tamei, is, as it were, undone by the wearing of this tzitz. Okay, now look at the next part of the pasuk, and this is what
you haven't shared the screen.
Oh, have I not shared the screen? Oh, sorry.
No.
Right, let me do that now. It's important that you see this. Got it yet? Yeah, okay. So let me do this again. This is the pasuk 38. It's there in the middle of the screen. V'hayar metzach Aaron, it will be upon the forehead of Aaron. V'nasa Aaron et avon hakodoshim, and Aaron will bear the iniquity, the sin of the sanctity, of the holiness, Asher yakdishu b'nei Israel, which the children of Israel sanctify, i.e. their korbanot, l'chol matnot kodshehem, the gifts of holiness that they bring. What are the gifts of holiness? The sacrifices. So this pasuk says, the beginning of this pasuk says, that this sits on the forehead of Aaron, will in some way atone for the Bnei Israel doing a sacrifice wrongly, including when they are tamei. It might not be that. It might be that the animal wasn't the right animal, or it had a blemish, or it was not a year old. It was older than it should have been, or it was left over, or it wasn't shechted right, or whatever it was that went wrong with this korban. The tzitz atones for that, and, as it were, sorts out the problem. Now, the Gemarah is going to debate the last part of this pasuk. V'haya al mitzcho tamid l'ratzon lahem lifnei Hashem. V'haya, and it will be al mitzcho, on his forehead, meaning on Aaron's forehead. Tamid. What's tamid mean? Always. Correct, Avril. Always. Constantly. L'ratzon lahem, to make it favorable. What's ratzon? Where have you heard that word ratzon before? How many times a day do we say ratzon? Lots. Give me one example.
In the
Ratzon.
diaspora during the blessing of the Kohanim.
Yehi ratzon milfanecha.
Yes, Yehi ratzon milefanecha. Yehi ratzon milefanecha. May it be your will before you. We say it in all sorts of things. We say, remember, Yehi ratzon milefanecha, Hashem Elokeinu, blah, 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 whatever it is we want. That's a Yehi ratzon, means may it be your will. It's a prayer. Yehi ratzon. We say it before before we eat all those different simanim on Rosh Hashanah. When we have our apple on our honey, what do we say? Yehi ratzon milefanecha Adonai Eloheinu shetechadesh aleinu shana tova umetuka. May it be your will, Hashem, our God, that you will renew for us a good and sweet year. And then we eat something else and we say a different Yehi ratzon. Yehi ratzon means may it be your will. So over here, v'hayal mitzchot tamid l'ratzon lahem lifnei Hashem. This thing, this tzit, will be on the forehead of Aharon in order to get favor, ratzon, in order to bring ratzon, in order to bring the favor of Hashem, the favor of the Bnei Israel, lifnei Hashem, before Hashem. So this pasuk, this rather innocent-looking pasuk, is now going to be debated by the Gemarah. And I just wanted to show you the Rashi on this pasuk. That's in the, I don't know if you can see, it might be a bit too small on the screen. So I'm going to read it to you in English, unless you can see that, Leon. Are you able to read that, or is it too small for you?
No, I can increase the size from... It is impossible to say from there.
Let's read the one before it.
Yes.
The iniquity of the holy things.
To appease God for the blood and the fat of the sacrifices that were offered up in a state of uncleanness, as we learned, which iniquity does he bear? If it is the iniquity of Pigul, it was already said, it will not be accepted. That is, if the one who performed the sacrificial service intended to
forget
partake...
that. Forget that. Let's go to the next one. It shall be upon his forehead constantly.
It is impossible to say that it should always be on his forehead, for it was not on him except at the time of the service. But it means that it will always make them, the sacrifices, favorable, even when it is not on his forehead, namely if the Kohen Gadol was not ministering at that time. Now, according to the one who says that only when it was on his forehead, it appeased and made the sacrifices acceptable, and otherwise it did not appease, upon his forehead constantly is interpreted to mean that he must touch it, the show plate, while it is upon his forehead, so that he would not take his mind off it.
So what Rashi is saying there is telling us that there are two opinions. He says it can't be that it means, this pasuk means literally tamid, constantly, because this tzitz was not on the Kohen Gadol's forehead all the time. I mean, he had to go to sleep, he had to have a shower, he had to go to the toilet. And in fact, it was only on him when he was doing the service. And he didn't do the service every day. Different Kohanim did it on different days. So what happens if a sacrifice comes along and it's not done right, and the Kohen Gadol's not on duty that day? He's gone to Blackpool for a day off, and he's not there. So what's that mean? It doesn't work. It's the sacrifice is no good. So there's an opinion that says it doesn't mean constantly, meaning sort of, literally 24/7, as we would say today. It means that whilst he's wearing it, he needs to be constantly aware of it, and he should touch it. Why should he touch it? because that gives him, puts his mind on it, as it were. You know, if you've got something on your head, after a while, you don't feel it's there. You know, how many those of us that wear a capel on our head, you know, you don't remember it's there after a while. It just sort of, you know, you don't feel it, you don't remember it's there. And I don't know how many times I've come out of the house and I've gone, oh, have I got it on? You know, oh yes, I've got it on. And you feel it and you've got it on. You know you've got it on. You feel it, oh, you haven't got it on. So Rashi says the other opinion is that he has to be touching it. And what do the words say? The pasuk tells us what it should say on this thing. Go back to verse 36. You shall make this head plate of gold, pure gold. You shall engrave on it, Kodesh Lashem, holy to Hashem. Kodesh Lashem, very, very powerful words. This is Kodesh Lashem. Let's go back to the Gemarah now. Let's go back to the Gemarah. You should have that on the screen in a sec. There you go. Okay, there is a picture of the tzitz. Okay, and there are the words Kodesh Lashem. Kodesh Lashem. Let's have a look at this, what it says here. The front plate of the high priest was a gold plate engraved with the words sacred to Hashem, Kodesh Lashem. And the high priest would wear the plate upon his forehead near his hairline. It is one of the 4 golden garments and one of the 8 garments that make up the full dress of the high priest. Remember this. It's one of the 4 golden garments. Remember what I've just said, because we're going to come back to that. Maybe not this week, but we're going to come back to it. The high priest would wear these 8 garments throughout the year, with the exception of when performing the service specific to Yom Kippur, when he would dress only in the white garments like all the other priests. Okay, that's important. So let's go back to our Gemarah. What has this got to do with the price of cheese, you're going to ask me? Okay. So we just said that Rabbi Yehuda allows intercalation, which shows that intercalation was a better option than doing this sacrifice in a state of tumah and pushing it to one side. But then the Gemarah asks, hang on a minute, tzitz ben sheyeshno al mitzcho ben she'eno al mitzcho meratzeh divrei Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says that tzitz works to sort out a faulty sacrifice, whether he's wearing it or he's not wearing it. That's Rabbi Shimon's view. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says no. Rabbi Yehuda says, Odo al mitzcho meratzeh. If he's wearing it, it works. The sacrifice which is not right is made right. Ein odo al mitzcho. If he's not wearing it, eino meratzeh, doesn't work. It does not effect acceptance, as it's said here. In other words, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it can only work if he's wearing it. Amar lo Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon's got a question to Rabbi Yehuda. Hang on a minute. What did we just say before up here? What did we just say? The Kohen Gadol only wears white on Yom Kippur. So on Yom Kippur, the very most important day of the year in terms of forgiveness, he's not wearing it. When he goes into the Kodesh Kodashim and he prays on behalf of the people and he does the avodah, the service that we read about last Shabbat in Parshat Acharei Mot. Isn't it amazing how often the Gemarah that we learn is paralleled by the Parsha? It's quite remarkable, especially since we go so slowly. So the avodah on Yom Kippur, which is all about forgiveness, he's not wearing this thing. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, it doesn't work if he's not wearing it. So what, you're going to tell me that on the most important day of the year, if there happens to be something wrong with one of the korbanot that Aaron brings be'ad ha'am, on behalf of the whole people, it's not going to be made good because he's not wearing it. Rabbi Shimon says, come on, Rabbi Yehuda, that can't be right. No, he says, I'm not buying that. Rabbi Yehuda, oh no, Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says to him, i.e. to Rabbi Yehuda, Kohen Gadol b'Yom HaKippurim yochiach she'einu al mitzcho umratzeh. The Yom Kippur service of the Kohen Gadol is a proof for my position that even if he's not wearing it, it works. You can't be right, he says. Amalo Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said to him, no. That's not a good proof. Hanach leYom HaKippurim. Leave aside the case of Yom Kippur, because I believe shetumah hutra b'tzibur, that impurity is not just pushed aside when the majority of the people are tameh, or when there is a public problem with tumah. It is hutra. It's got rid of. It's permitted. Finished. We don't need the head plate of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, because tum'ah hutra b'tzibur. If it turned out that one of the public offerings that Aaron did was no good because of tum'ah, don't worry about it, because this tum'ah, this impurity, is got rid of. It's not just pushed to one side, it's got rid of. Well, hang on a minute. We didn't say that before, did we? Look at it a few lines earlier. We said, Rabbi Yehuda, Tuma dechuyahi b'tzibur. Rabbi Yehuda, according to the first part of this brisa, this part of this Gemarah, says that Tuma is not got rid of completely. It's only pushed to one side, and I'd rather not do that. I'd rather intercalate a year than rely on that. Well, that's not consistent with this, what we've just said, that Rabbi Yehuda says it's pushed aside, not temporarily, but completely got rid of. If he's willing to get rid of it so that it doesn't interfere with the Yom Kippur offerings, Kal v'chomer, how much more so he ought to be willing to get rid of this impurity so it doesn't interfere with a Korban Pesach, which is less important than Yom Kippur. And he's not willing to do that, apparently. He wants to intercalate a year so that he doesn't have to get rid of the tumah by using this trick, as it were. So we've got an inconsistency now between Rabbi Yehuda's opinion on the one hand over here that says the impurity is only temporarily and partially pushed aside, and the same Rabbi Yehuda who says the exact opposite a few lines later. So how are we going to deal with that? Okay, well, we're going to deal with that in a very unsatisfactory manner, in my opinion. We're going to bring in a concept. I'm not going to do it today. I'm going to do it next week because it's going to take more than 4 minutes, and I have a hard finish today on time because I've got something on. I've got a conference on shortly. And I don't want to go over. But what we're going to do next time is something which gave me a great deal of grief when I was younger and learning Gemarah. And I'd be interested to know what your reactions will be when we actually do this next week, please God. And because we're going to sort out this clear contradiction between two statements attributed to Rabbi Yehuda, which are mutually exclusive. They can't both be right. And this was always something that really bothered me about learning Gemarah when I was younger, and even more intransigent than I am now in my thinking, that I just could not handle the Queen of Hearts situation of having 5 contradictions before breakfast. Things that were mutually exclusive and that were explained away bothered me a great deal, but that's what we're going to do. The Gemarah is going to attempt to explain away two mutually exclusive statements of Rabbi Yehuda next week. So, in summary, what have we done today? We recapped a little bit about the idea of impurity. We looked at the idea of Tuma Betzibur, when the majority of people are impure, whether that impurity can be temporarily or permanently put aside. And we also looked at the somewhat magical properties of this thing here, the tzitz, when it is on the forehead of the Kohen Gadol, or according to Rabbi Shimon, when it is not on the forehead of the Kohen Gadol. If I had Rabbi Shimon here with me, I would be asking him, why would the Torah say the word tamid, permanently, if that's not what it meant? I don't believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is deliberately trying to confuse us. So I would like to know Rabbi Shimon's view on what he's going to do with that word tamid, but I don't have him here, so we're going to have to leave the Gemarah to explain away these contradictions, both with Rabbi Shimon and with Rabbi Yehuda, and we will try and do that next week. Before I ask for any questions, we are going to do a special on Sunday morning. Avril will do a flyer for it. Instead of the Tanakh Shir on Sunday morning, in honor of Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut, which are coming up next week, and because there isn't really any other time to do it, Yom HaZikaron evening is not suitable, Yom HaAtzmaut evening is not suitable, and Monday evening is the Poleg Rosh Chodesh ladies group, and I dare not clash with that. My life would definitely not be worth living if I did that. It only leaves us Sunday to do it, and so I'm going to do it instead of the Tanakh Shir on Sunday morning. The title of the talk is Why Some Jews Are Anti-Zionist. Those of you who've got good memories, better than mine, may remember that I did this about 5 years ago in person, in the days when Zoom was a tray for ice lolly and not a method of shiurim. I did it in person about 5 years ago, and I'm going to repeat it, the same idea. Why some Jews are anti-Zionist. I'm going to explain, not necessarily agree with, but I'm going to explain the position where it came from, that some of the ultra-Orthodox people are anti-Zionist, why they are, and what is it based on, and the sources that they bring to support their arguments. I think it's important that those of us who are not anti-Zionist are equipped with the information that actually many of them don't even know themselves why they are, because they just follow their Rebbe. But it's important that we understand their arguments, because there is some merit to some of their arguments. If we are going to put forward our pro-Zionist feelings, we need to understand and we need to be able to challenge the other side of the story. And that's what I'm going to talk about on Sunday morning. Avril will kindly do a flyer, which we'll try and send out before Shabbat. It will be at 10:15 on Sunday morning. Any questions on today's Gemarah? Any questions or comments on today's Gemarah? No? In that case, I shall bid you farewell and see you soon.
Thank you, Johnny.
Thank you, Johnny.
Thank you.